Jason Baxter, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
How are you?
Doing great.
What do you think of my my in-home studio? It's July, and we're above a garage, and the AC barely reaches up here. How are you? How are you feeling now?
This feels great.
Okay, good.
It's better than mine.
I can't be running it now because it's loud. It was on when you came in here, the window AC, but I was just trying to run it for the past 2 hours just to try to get it cooled down before you came in, because otherwise 3 p.m., 3:30 p.m. on a July afternoon, you don't want to be in this room.
I'm so content right now.
Good. I'm so glad to hear it. Well, pleasure to have you on the show. For my listeners, Jason and I met on the campus of Notre Dame.
That's right.
During a Divine Liturgy. I think most of my listeners know at least that I attend the Divine Liturgy on campus. Father Khaled Anatolios, who chairs the theology department, is a Melkite priest. So he celebrates Divine Liturgy there most Sundays during the academic term. And you and your family attend fairly frequently, at least you used to when you lived here full time, year round.
That's right.
But that's how we met you, and we struck up a friendship, and then you immediately left for greener pastures.
Yeah.
But no, you did leave. You were at Notre Dame as a visiting associate professor.
Yes.
But now you are the director of the Center for Beauty and Culture at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas.
That's right.
Which I know many of my listeners are well familiar with. So tell me more about the Center for Beauty and Culture at Benedictine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the world's greatest job. Benedictine is. I jokingly say that a lot of universities, none of which need to be named, are more like Fortune 500 companies, and they have a CEO and they have a hierarchy, right? And they have a brand, and they're like Coca-Cola or Chrysler or something like that, and they do a great job doing what they do, but they make one model. Whereas I think Benedictine College is more like a venture capital firm. It's extremely creative, and it's doing all kinds of things. And one of the things that it's doing is my center, the Center for Beauty and Culture. And Benedictine College had this incredibly ambitious plan in which they say, we're going to transform culture in America in 40 years. And I just had a lot of fun just thinking about that. Say, okay.
Wait, so the small college in Kansas said we're going to transform American culture in 40 years.
Exactly.
That is ambitious.
It is ambitious, and I just had a lot of fun thinking about that. Okay, well, I mean, what would you do if you took that seriously and not cynically? And say, all right, we're in Atchison, Kansas. We're in the middle. We're almost, literally at the center point of the country, right? We're not on the coast. We don't have a $30 billion endowment. We don't have, right? But if you were to take that mandate actually seriously, and so thinking about that through, for the Center for Beauty and Culture has been just an absolute delight. And to Benedictine College's, credit, they've given me tons of space for creativity and to thinking. So I'm making a film this summer on St. Cuthbert's Way. We had James Macmillan, the wonderful Scottish composer, come in town last spring, and we sang his music back to him, and he gave us this speech about how music arises from mystical silence and returns to mystical silence. In the fall, I'm teaching a class called The Experience of Beauty, in which we're going to talk some kind of theological things, philosophical things, sociological things, but then we're going to do a whole series of things. How to read a novel, in which I'll be premiering some of my material in Brothers Karamazov, how to read a lyric poem, how to listen to a symphony and a sonata. But my hope is that we won't just be talking about these things, but the students will be experiencing each of those things. So we'll sort of set them up. We're going to say, all right, how do you read a play? But then they don't know this yet. Don't tell them. Hopefully they're not listening. But then I'm going to make them be in a play.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to hire a director to come down, and she's going to make them act out a couple of scenes from The Tempest. So no passivity allowed. They're going to be forced to not just think about beauty, but to be in the middle of it and experience it. And
what's your student population here? Is this freshmen, sophomores, juniors? Is this an elective? Is this a part of the core curriculum? Is this an honors college type of thing?
Yeah, so Benedictine has these things called these institutes of distinction.
Okay.
They have something for business leaders. They have something for those who are particularly interested in the whole political domain. And then they've got these people called Angelico Fellows, which belong to me. These are the people interested in beauty and culture.
So this is sort of liberal arts focused.
Yeah, I mean, as I like to say, look, if you think about sort of like a college of science, right? A college of science would study reality on the biochemical level, on the chemical level, on the biological level, on the physics level, right? The astrological level, all these things. We do the same thing for beauty. We consider beauty in all of its manifestations in music and painting and literature. We're there to study beauty, but also, most importantly, what it does for the human soul and why we need it so much now.
Is it a challenge being in Atchison, Kansas, which is more or less a suburb of Kansas City, right? About 45 minutes out of Kansas City. Is it a challenge there and not, for example, having the New York Metropolitan Opera House, that can be accessible by a bus ride, or large galleries? Is it a challenge, or can you use digital means to replace that? And if so, how do you feel about using the digital to sort of supplant the incarnational? I imagine that's challenging in other ways.
So many cool questions. First of all, Kansas City actually has a ton of music.
Okay.
They've got a great chamber music society. They've got a great opera. They've got a great symphony. Actually, they have multiple chamber music societies. You know what? Obviously, yes. But on the other hand, let's just be honest for a second. The arts have been colonized by the progressive left for decades.
That is true.
And so you could be in a place like San Francisco or London or New York, but those and you could get some high quality performances. Obviously, those are great things, right? You can go hear a great Chopin recital of Yu Yang, right? You could hear some great stuff. That's lovely. But I think what's sort of special about Kansas is that we have a vision to reconnect beauty and holiness, and in part, the beauty of beauty is that it's this integrative experience in which it reconnects my will, my hunger for goodness, with my mind and with my sort of perception of the depths of reality. So, yeah, I think it obviously is a challenge, but that's kind of the nature of the job. As I say, the goal is to get the world into Kansas and Kansas back out into the world. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of sad to put it like this in just sort of blunt market terms, but I would say for people who are doing traditional art, classical art, real art, that is beauty which is connected to the tradition, innovative, yes, but also traditional, and connected to holiness, it's a buyer's market. And I think there are more artists out there who are working than people would suspect, and they're struggling to get by, but they believe in what they're doing, and they're practicing a traditional craft. So I guess, to make a long story short, yeah, it is a challenge, but I also think it's an incredible opportunity with people with an eye for talent, with a hunger for discovering new things, because there's a lot of really cool things happening. We just need a place in which these stars can make a constellation.
Yeah. So how do we do that? You're teaching students, you're preparing these students to be artists or be at least better equipped to appreciate art, but they're going out into a world in which there are a lot of artists out there, as you just said, but they're struggling to get by because people aren't recognizing that they're out there. So how do we change the tide there? How do we reinvigorate the desire for art and beauty that is in all of us, but in most of us, I think it's a latent desire. We don't even recognize that it's there. It's hidden. True. It's hidden so deeply under our various dopamine addictions. How do we?
Oh yes,
how do we get to that?
That's well said. I think it's complicated. This is not really answering your question, just to restate it and say that it's complicated. But one of my favorite articles in this subject is Dana Gioia's 1994, I think, in the Atlantic. His article, "Can Poetry Still Matter?" And the answer is yes. But how is the interesting part. And he says it's going to be an ecological problem. That is, if you think about an ecosystem, imagine an ecosystem, say like the Sahara, in which you only had lions. Mm-hmm. It would obviously fail, right?
A problem, yeah.
You had no gazelles,
yeah.
No grass. The lions would last for a short time, right? It's going to be this sort of complicated balance of multiple things. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you need is, first of all, you need people who hunger and thirst for righteousness, right? And who believe that part of the glory of being a human being is manifesting the beauty of the divine here on earth. That is, of course I want to get to heaven, right? But I think sometimes our pietistic desire makes us have contempt for the opportunities, for the days, for the hours, for the minutes we have in this life to try to reveal and manifest the glory of God in this world. And as traditional as I am, I think that's a unique gift of modernity. And therefore, I like being a modern Christian, even though I also want to cultivate this kind of Aeneas-like piety for the past. But anyway, we need those types of people, right? I guess in market terms, we would call them consumers. But I'd prefer to think of those people as having more agency, right? More of a desire. We need people who hunger for these things. Then, of course, we have artists. But we also need teachers to connect these artists to the depth of the past, right? These artists are sort of naturally creatives, right? This is what they do. It's how they think. but we want them to be in connection with the deepest possible thinkers from the past, such that they're creating their own kind of dialogue or dialectic between what is new and what is old, right? As Augustine puts it, in Confessions, he prays to you who are ever ancient, ever new. I think you might even just be able to say it as a quick, rule of thumb. That's what beauty is. It's a phenomenon in which the eternity manifests itself in this world in a way which feels both ever ancient and ever new. It's both traditional, but sometimes tradition can feel a little bit stale when we're only trying to reduplicate things of our ancestors. And so it also feels new simultaneously. It's kind of a miracle. Anyway, so we need teachers to put artists in connection. Obviously, we need patrons, right? We need people to help supply us with the financial means to do these really sort of bold things. And thus, I think we need writers, we need critics, we need this whole kind of ecosystem of people to do this. And so, if you go on and ask the hard question, well, how do you do that, right? Well, I guess you start a Center for Beauty and Culture in the middle of Kansas, right?
That's a perfect.
So we can get everyone in there and mix them all up together.
I think that's right. So, I mean, how do... I've been thinking about this problem a lot, actually, just to take a step back. This problem of content creation, because there are so many. I mean, there are surveys. I gave a talk in Slovakia a month and a half ago, and one of the things I talked about is how one of the top desired professions or occupations in America today among young grade school and middle school students is content creator. 50 years ago it was astronaut. And now it's content creator. People just want to...
Baseball player.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, people don't even want to be baseball players anymore. Now it's just content creator. They want to be like a YouTuber or a professional video gamer.
That says a lot about our country.
It says so much about our country and where we are. And it's not even just our country. I mean, this is a pretty global phenomenon among the developed world. If you have high-speed internet access and you have devices in the hands of your children, they want to be content creators. And then you look at the types of content that are trending now, and it's horrible. It's cheap. It's derivative. In many cases, it's just risque and sexual, and yet it's everywhere. And it feels even bad to talk about, Catholic content creators or Catholic content creation, because it almost cheapens what we should do.
Sounds kind of icky.
It does, exactly. It sounds kind of icky because it sounds like we're just trying to be algorithmically captive like everyone else is.
Yeah.
But you're right that we need to have Catholics who are creating things. I think the problem is that there won't be a market for them when you're going up against these, these Instagram creators or these YouTube creators who know exactly how to play to the algorithm and are willing to morally compromise to do that.
Yes.
It's going to be really hard to get people to watch your documentary about St. Cuthbert when they could instead just indulge their base passions in whatever way they want to by watching this series of YouTube videos, So I think that's challenge number one. And it's linked to challenge number two, which is this real lack of education about the arts and what it is to be a good person.
Right.
I think you're right that it's good that we have a university that's thinking seriously about this. And I know there are others too, but I'm glad that Benedictine is one of them.
Right.
Because people now think about universities, they talk about universities, and they think about universities as places primarily for skilling, for occupations.
Right.
You go to university so that you can get your undergrad degree in engineering so that you can be an engineer. And it used to be the case that you would go to universities to be formed in virtue, because that's the goal of a classical education.
Right.
Now we think about it in skilling. But if we can get our universities back to a point where we help our young people actually be good people, be men and women of character, that's the kind of person that is formed in the virtues so that they can appreciate the art that you're talking about.
That's right. I mean, Eliot said at some point, maybe in Courses from the Rock, or was it for quartets, human beings are not very good at complexity. And it just seems like the easiest possible thing is just to say both and.
Yeah.
It's okay to acquire a trade. That's good. It's okay to acquire those types of skills, isn't it? Right. And we need those types of people. And people need to think smart, because our market is so volatile that people who spend 4 precious years, learning computer codes are, now out of work because artificial intelligence is basically demolishing that market, right? And so I think you have to ask how many other kind of professions, will be like that. And so, if you're going to have to learn a new profession on the job because you're creative, smart, and deep, well, why not study Homer in archaic Greek? And why not study Plato? And why not study theology in Aquinas and Augustine and Isaac the Syrian? A little shout out to the Byzantines, right? And,
I love it.
And Dostoevsky, right? Why not sort of feed on those types of things? And of course you need to make money, right? We have bodies, we have flesh, we have families, and that's great and that's beautiful. And so I think we can say both and. And I think that's one of the exciting things about my center is that I don't have a particular type of student. I have some English majors and they're great. I have some theology majors and they're great. But I also have astrophysicists and engineers and nurses and all kinds of different people. And I think this class for them is a really cool experience. And I agree with you, of course, in terms of, we've created. In one of my books, I call it the apocalypse of beauty. My book, Why Literature Still Matters, that just came out. And my sort of case, my argument for that is that we're experiencing an apocalypse. Of course, not in terms of megatons of nuclear bombs, even though, come to find out, that's a fresh threat again in the in the international world. Yeah. But really what we're doing is we're just overloading our world with, as you said, this kind of cheap quantitative content, such that even if you're a noble person with, moral gravity and you hunger for these things and you go looking for it, it's going to be hard to find it unless you already have a guide, right? I think that's in some sense this kind of, this apocalypse of just sheer kind of, quantity. I get that. I guess the alternative, but the other side of that, the good piece of news that goes along with it. Well, okay. The bad news is that our souls are starving. All right, that's not good. The good news is that what I've discovered is that if you can put some qualitatively rich content in front of people. If I as a writer, as a content producer, if I as a writer, right, can briefly for a moment as I'm writing, not ask the question, how does this get likes and how does this get opens in an email? But how can I write something which is qualitatively so beautiful it'll make people it'll make people cry or make people sort of have their hearts change. When I can do that with my students, they're starved for this stuff. Yeah. Right. It's like eating an orange in late November, right? All of a sudden you realize, man, I needed this vitamin C, right? I think that's the sort of good news is that we're made in the image and likeness of God. The gospel is written on our hearts. We have these things deep down within. And so I think it's an awesome day to do what we're doing. It's an awesome day to be a podcaster. It's an awesome day to be a writer but I think we've got to embrace preferring qualitative things to quantitative success. And look, if the quantitative success comes, of course that's a good thing. Of course you don't say no to that. But I think what we have to do is we have to think about individuals. And I'm going to start to sound like Jacques Philippe in a hurry, right? But we have to think about nourishing the souls of individuals. Mm-hmm. And I think what you'll find, I'm sure what you find, but I think what teachers are finding is this is an incredible age. There's a rich harvest there, even if our students aren't as aware of it as we are.
Yeah, well, but I think the students are more aware of it than we often think they are, and they're more aware of it than their parents are in many cases. I mean, I stand by everything I already said about how hard this is and how it's hard to create beauty and then go up against the algorithm or these other pieces of content that are playing to the algorithm. And I think all that's true, but in the same way that if you were to just have chocolate bars every day, you might enjoy, I don't know how much you like chocolate. You might enjoy that for a little bit. You might enjoy that for a long time, but there will come a point where you just realize that you are not getting what you need from just the chocolate bars. And you look at yourself in the mirror and think, oh my goodness, what has happened?
Not even like with hazelnut.
This is exactly.
Not even that's good.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But there would come a point where you just realize this is not what I was made for. Like I was made for a much wider diversity of food. I was made to actually have nutrition and not just sugar. I can't just survive and thrive on the saturin stuff. And I do think there is a big recognition among young people today that they were made for more than that.
That's right.
Like our generation is the first one that has had iPhones in their pockets since, college or shortly after college. Like our formative adult years have been with technology in our pockets. And our children have the same experience of like they're the first true digital natives and that they have had technology accompanying them all the way through their journey. Like you and I had a fairly analog childhood, right?
Right.
But our kids have had this digital stuff all their lives and they don't know any better. But I really think there is this latent and now awakening desire on the part of a lot of young people that there is more than that, which is exactly why I think you're seeing this return to at least religious or what I call metaphysical curiosity on the part of Gen Z people. They're becoming more religious than their parents because they're realizing, wait, I was raised on this, but like, what does all this mean? It doesn't actually mean anything.
That's right. As soon as they discover that there's more than chocolate bars, they're curious in what other things taste like.
Precisely. I was reading this book called Magic Pill by Johann Hari, and it's about Ozempic. And it's very interesting. I recommend it. I learned a lot. But one of the things he talks about is how if you go to U.S. schools and ask children, elementary grade school kids, what their favorite foods are, they'll tell you, Skittles, pudding, whatever. If you go to Japan and you ask grade school kids the same question, they will tell you broccoli, carrots, and it's because of what they are fed on a regular basis. You crave, like this goes to the point of habits and virtue formation, and the more we have to awaken that desire that's in there on the part of all of us. We have to awaken that desire on the part of young people. You were made for more. This is beauty. And then we have to feed that desire and sort of nurture that desire. And by doing so, shape that desire so that it's ready for more. And I think that's what programs like yours are doing very well. I hope you're doing well. I imagine since you're running you're doing it very well. But exactly, brain broccoli. Like this is good for you. This is actually good stuff.
And then of course, when you get good at it, it's delightful too.
Yeah.
In fact, it's as I mean, who enjoys tennis the first time that they play, right? I mean, you hit yourself in the head with the racket. It's not very fun.
Right.
If you get good at it, it's really fun. Right. Who enjoys playing chords and scales on a piano, right? That's not fun. But if you get good at it and you can close your eyes and play the piece of Chopin you've memorized on the piano, that's fun, right? And so I think analogously, maybe that's one of a good educator's secret characteristics, is that he or she makes the boring stuff as delightful as possible, and yet realizing that you can't cut out those sort of nuts and bolts to ultimately get to the level that your students will be empowered to do this well and by themselves.
Right. There's no cheat code. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I don't have a great segue to this, but I do want to talk about your translation of Dante.
Right.
So you've talked about artists. We've talked about content creators, and we won't use that term because of all its baggage, but you are a creator of some sort. Speaking of ever ancient, ever new. Speaking of ever ancient, ever new, Dante, his trilogy.
Yeah.
Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso.
Yes.
And you've been translating this, which you've described, perhaps not exactly these words, but at least in this form, as a Herculean task, because it's been so difficult. And you've completed 2 of the books.
Yes.
In progress on the 3rd.
Yes. Paradiso is in the works, coming out next year. But
okay.
Yeah. Inferno and Paradiso are out.
But this was your PhD topic, right? Not the translation, but Dante's work?
Dante was,
okay.
Yeah.
When did you first encounter Dante?
My first year away from home, grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. I went to this tiny college, Augustine College, called Augustine College in Ottawa, Canada. There's 13 students.
You went to college in Canada?
Just for a year. It was a year-long program,
Amazing.
non-accredited. My parents thought it was nuts. Like, how did you discover this place? It was absolutely amazing.
Wow.
I mean, it changed my life. It opened my eyes to the existence of the liberal arts, and I loved every second of it. But anyway, I read Dante there for the first time.
Okay.
And I thought it was boring. I thought it was, I was like,
you read all 3 books, or just a little bit, or
probably quit.
Snippets?
Probably quit halfway through.
Yeah.
It was that boring, and I was kind of wimpy. So, I think I read about half of it. I thought, what the heck is going on here? And then dropped it. So I think a lot of my own teaching, and certainly my own writing, and probably now my translation, is me trying to go back and address that 18-year-old version of myself and say, hey man, because I mean, it would have been really easy if I had just got through, and people would ask me, later, hey, have you ever read the comedy? And I would say, yeah, I've read it, but it wasn't for me. And this sort of, I think, miss out on all this, this rich treasury. So
I think this is helpful though, because it illustrates what we were just talking about, that you were an 18-year-old kid. I assume this Augustine College is a Catholic thing.
It was Christian. Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
were you Catholic? Are you?
I wasn't Catholic.
Okay,
at the time,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're a committed Christian kid. You find this Christian program.
Kid, yeah.
You go. You read Dante. Not for me. Done.
That's right.
And yet here you are now, singing the song of Dante, teaching it to your students, publishing new translations of his works, etc. So something happened in the intervening years to awaken that awareness in you.
That's right. That's right. Well, I mean, I didn't like it the second time I read it, but I liked it more.
When was the second time?
That was at University of Dallas.
So that's where you actually did your 4-year degree.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was this right after Augustine College?
It was.
Okay.
And then I read it a third time at graduate school at Notre Dame. And that was the sort of moment I was being taught by a Marxist from Manchester, who was a world-leading Dante expert.
A Dante Marxist.
Yes.
Wow.
But, part of his, kind of Marxist program is, well, let's look at Dante in the conditions of his day to show in what way he was sort of a transgressive cultural figure.
Of course. Yeah.
Right?
That's the through line of Marxism. Yeah.
Right. But what it meant is that he was able to show us how Dante was putting forward uniquely poetic solutions in his day, or why Dante even thought that he might, as a poet, lay claim to be a theologian. And so that, for me, that's when everything changed. When I realized that in some sense, Dante thought he had this tool, this secret weapon of poetry, and not just poetry, but poetry in the vernacular. And that this could do things that theologians had hungered to do themselves. Now, being a morally serious kid, right? And at that point, a married man with a kid, I thought, oh, wow.
By that point, you mean grad school, Notre Dame.
That's right, yeah. Right. Dante's poetry can do serious heart work, serious heart surgery. I mean, because it was fascinating, this idea of, you find this in the Fathers, right? Of, John of Damascus, that he says that we have septic wounds, right? Our sins are septic wounds. It's even when we're not on the surface level, we're not committing obvious and embarrassing mortal sins. The fact is, most of the time, I kind of wish I were, right? I'm disappointed that I have to be good, right? I'm regretful of that. And for the Fathers, that's what really the spiritual life is about, is conducting that sort of deep surgery on that, right? The kind of open heart spiritual surgery in cooperation with the Holy Spirit and, and the liturgy and the sacraments. To have Dante step forward and say, and Dante didn't lack confidence, say, I've got a new tool. It's called the comedy. It's called vernacular poetry, and I can help. That for me was eye-opening. And then I think that's when I really fell in love with this, that Dante in some sense, thought he had a surgically sharp scalpel, and it was called poetry. And he could do stuff so that you had to respond to it. He could do things in which you would stop thinking that Christianity is a series of correct opinions in your brain and thinking about it as a living encounter with beauty himself. And that poetry, in some sense, could plant seeds in the heart, which would flourish in these virtues.
Yeah,
that's when I got excited, and then I started to care about the poetic details of Dante,
the literary structures, the syllables, the verse. Is that what you mean by the?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, and this for me was also just coming back to it as a translator. This was also kind of a breakthrough moment for me. I mean, I had to kind of being a kind of whole-brained learner kind of guy. I had to feel my way into this. When I started doing the translation, I thought, what? This will be fun to do, useful for me. And I thought, what? Look, at the very least, to be like, it's like memorizing that piano piece when you were a kid, and you close the book, and then you can play it from memory, right? I want to do that with the master. I want to draw that close to Dante's poetry because I teach it,
Sure, yeah.
That's what I'll do. But while I was translating...
What year was this? When did you decide to start this project? Because this must be a years-long endeavor.
That's right. Well, I started doing this in 2018.
Okay.
Because I had to translate all the passages I used in my beginner's guide. So
you wanted to use your own translation. Yeah, okay.
I probably would have used someone else, but they were asking ridiculous numbers. They wanted, like $40,000 to use it. So I just said, all right, fine, I'll do it myself. And I started getting into it. I thought, this is actually kind of fun. So I thought, all right, look, I've already translated 25% of it anyway. Might as well just finish the other 75. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I started... Yeah,
it strikes me as one of those sort of exponential things that, it's not that 75% is just 3 times as hard as 25%, but actually it's, 30 times or whatever, because the more you're doing the whole corpus, the more you have to incorporate.
Well, what I didn't realize, I'd done all the fun parts for the beginner's guide. I just picked all the cherries and left all the leaves on the tree, but now I got to pick the leaves too, right?
Classic.
Anyway, so I started translating it, and at first I just thought, well, I don't know if the world needs another Dante translation, but I want to do it. It's kind of fun. I've got a publisher. Let's just give it a shot. But when I got into it, I realized, oh my goodness, the world does need a new Dante translation.
Well, I read your article that you wrote this year for...
That's right.
Yeah. what was the outlet?
Catholic
the Catholic thing, yeah. And you talked about this and sort of how it was very gracious of you. You didn't name any names, but you basically said, it's a very challenging thing. You talked about how you've lost hair and over the process, and you've just been, this has been, I think, a spiritually or psychologically depleting exercise for you.
Exhausting, absolutely.
Which, I mean, yeah, it makes sense for sure when you're just wrestling with the words of a master like that. But you have these passages in which you show, here's what Dante is trying to say, right. Here's what he's saying in the literal Italian.
That's right.
And then here's how a popular translator translated it. And
an unnamed, best-selling translator, exactly. Whom one must not look up in a Google search.
Yeah, I mean, easy enough to find, but I think gracious of you to not actually name names. But it was helpful. I mean, let me read a couple here. So you say, for example, this put into my will a burning eagerness to contemplate the one who spoke to me, a will that cannot rest until it's face to face. And then you say, a respected translator puts that last line this way, a will that cannot rest short of its goal. I mean, even me.
Kills the face to face.
It completely kills the face to face.
And replaces it with something abstract.
Yeah.
A goal.
Yeah.
It quantifies, in a way.
Right.
A qualitative experience of looking at someone face to face.
Right.
Yeah.
You have this other example from Purgatorio. If I have sunk my teeth, and you have in parentheses, that's a carno, which I imagine is from the root carniver meat, like sink your teeth. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I've sunk my teeth into your meaning with my intellect, the one I heard at first replied to me, you're talking of the Arno. You say, the shocking word accarno was simply too perfect in Italian. It makes the whole argument in two words by means of rhyming with the feral, brutal, savage Arno. Mm-hmm. An admired translator renders it this way. If my wit has truly grasped your meaning, completely different. I mean, it's, look, I'm not throwing stones at other translators because
anonymous translators.
I couldn't be a translator at all of this.
Yeah.
But what it does for me is just impress upon me the difficulty of doing this, because these translators are smart guys and gals, who have made these mistakes.
Right.
But that's a difficult thing to do. I mean, how do you actually grasp that well?
Yeah. Well,
and then I think poetry to my layman's mind is doubly difficult because you want to preserve some sense of the verse, right?
Yes.
You're not tied to the same syllabic meter, I imagine, but you want to preserve some sense that this is indeed a poem,
right? And
not just be too freewheeling with your prose. So
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So I mean, I was able to keep a metrical scheme. It's an iambs, ba-bum, 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 with substitutions, just like Dante does. But it's a flexible line, which allows me to both sort of stay close to Dante, but also you can feel the music of this.
What does a flexible line mean?
Oh, it means that some lines will be 10 syllables, some lines will be 12, some will be 14, right?
But they're all even?
They're all, broadly iambic with lawful substitutions.
Okay.
Yeah. So the poetry is there. The poetry is what you would essentially find in something like Wordsworth, right? Well, I mean, I think really a close approximation to what you find in Dante. I don't rhyme, like the number of chips you have to commit to rhyming in English, to doing what is easy in Italian. They can just toss off a rhyme. I thought was too much. I thought it would just sort of take me away from these other things that I wanted to do, like what we could call the register.
Does it rhyme all throughout in Italian?
It does.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
It does. Yeah, and it's one of the glories.
That's
and
impressive.
Someone like Dorothy Sayers wanted that more than anything else. And so she went after those rhymes. But what it meant was...
So she has a translation that rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, and Lewis loved it.
Wow, didn't realize that.
Oh boy, I think I'm just destroyed all my sales. Everyone's going to Dorothy Sayers now. Well, I have to choose the qualitative over the quantitative.
But I think, I don't know, it's tough. I mean, it almost seems like if you really want it that badly, just learn Italian, and then you can have it in the original.
Yeah. I mean, Dorothy Sayers goes all in on these rhymes, but what she has to do is that she has to use all kinds of words, and so she borrows a lot of kind of archaic words from like the poetry of Spenser.
Interesting.
And thus her poem has, though it rhymes, has a kind of strange archaic quality to it, which is not what Dante does.
Got it.
Dante's poetry feels fresh and urgent, like it was written yesterday.
Yeah.
And kind of edgy and fast. And I think
how does it compare to modern Italian? You say it feels like it was written yesterday, but I mean, does it feel these and thous, to a modern Italian speaker?
That's a great question. I would say it's as different from modern Italian as Shakespeare is from.
Okay, makes sense.
Maybe something between Shakespeare and Chaucer.
Okay.
Maybe a tiny bit. Maybe Spenser, right? I mean, there's a tiny, yeah. I mean, so a modern high school student has to read it with commentary.
In Italy.
In Italy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a modern Italian high school student has commentary there. Some of the words have changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the forms have changed. And yet, Dante was insistent that his vernacular was doing something different, something more in the blood and in the veins and in the pulse than he could have written it in Latin.
Yeah.
Which he thought was the language of the head. And sometimes the language of the heart.
Language of the okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
The intellect, yeah.
Yeah, the language of the intellect, right? I mean, and so this for me was the big breakthrough, was sort of reading contemporary cognitive psychologist about what it feels like to be bilingual. And now cognitive psychologists are beginning to show that in fully bilingual people, our emotions map differently physiologically in the body. They present differently in different languages. It's really cool. It's really exciting.
Though. Yeah.
And so Dante was living in this bilingual world.
So what's the best language if you have anger management issues?
Probably
something like Swedish or something, some like
yeah,
even-keeled Scandinavian tongue,
Maybe Latin. Yeah.
Maybe Latin.
So I think Dante is code switching probably every single day of his life.
Yeah.
Kind of like maybe, a grad student in the US from a foreign country is, right? But when these they're the great examples, right, of even these spouses in a relationship, even when their spouse doesn't speak their second language. If you really need to yell at your spouse, you're going to revert back to
sure.
To the language is more rooted in the body. And so my case in this translation is that Dante's genius and the power of the poetry is that he wanted all of the goods of Latin, which was presenting in the head, right? Had clarity, had ambition, had kind of an elevated tone. But he also wanted all of the goods of the language, as he says, that was taught to him by his nurse.
Yeah.
Right? The language of the body, the language of affection, the language of embracing, the language of kin and the familiar and the domestic. If you could get, in some sense, you could say those cognitive qualities simultaneously, then you'd have a poem.
Got it.
And a poem which was unforgettable. A poem which was as ambitious as anything that had been written in antiquity. But a poem which was so rooted in the body that you would be forced to respond to it.
Now it's three works, but is it considered one poem? Inferno, yes. Purgatorio, Paradiso.
Yes, okay. Yes, it's totally one poem, and we know this in part because of his neurotic system for measuring it out. He's got one introductory.
I've heard about this. Yeah.
He's got one introductory canto when he gets lost in a dark wood. And then he's got three so-called canticles, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, which are 33, 33, 33.
Right.
So it makes a perfect 100. And so it's a symphony of threes and tens.
Okay. Got it. I love that. Who was Dante? I mean, is this an Oscar Wilde character who is clearly serious but conflicted and living a life divided by sin but writing important works? Is this someone who is a devout churchman? Is this someone who is, I know he has some harsh words for wayward clerics. Is this someone who is disillusioned by the church? Tell me who Dante is, because I really know very little about him as a person.
Yeah, he was from an aristocratic family, the Alighieri family, but kind of a busted, poor aristocratic family.
So a family of has-beens.
Yeah, or maybe exactly, a family who had seen better days. Yeah. But he's still aristocratic, and he still hangs out with the top-notch Florentines. And so
he's from Florence. His family
he's from Florence, and he's well off enough that he can get an aristocrat's, even though he's a layman, he can get an aristocrat's education, and he gets good training in Latin literacy, and he reads some of the poems. But what he really does with the hot thing is that he composes love lyric in Italian, in imitation of the Sicilians who had done it a half century before, who in their turn had been imitating the Provençal love lyric poems. So there's kind of this fad, and you could almost think of it sort of medieval singer-songwriters, right?
Okay.
Like smart singer-songwriters. They're producing this poetry, and Dante sort of lands in this kind of genre of love poetry, which
is exactly what it sounds like. It's romance poetry.
Yeah, it's weird stuff. Really weird stuff. My students hate it. It's so
Okay.
strange because it's from a very different culture.
Okay.
Lewis writes about it in The Allegory of Love. But essentially, it comes out of this aristocratic culture in which you write love poetry for the wife of your lord, your feudal lord, your
Odd.
boss.
Odd.
Now, of course, it's
a weird one.
I know, that's why I almost didn't want to talk about it. Of course, he's 10 years older than the wife.
Right.
But you're your lord's subordinate, so you're closer to her age.
Sure, yeah.
She's gorgeous, she's beautiful, but that's a relationship that is not allowed.
Yes.
So you write poetry about it, but it's kind of like semi-anonymous. I don't know who wrote this, and we don't know who it's addressed to, but everyone kind of knowingly knows. And so it's kind of strange and secretive and interior. That's where all this stuff is born. It's born in these kind of medieval French and medieval Provençal kind of courts.
Fascinating.
Becomes a fashion, right? Moves into Italy and becomes a fashion in Italy. So, I mean, actually, what a compliment to Dante. If this is the weird genre that he inherited, to go from there to writing the comedy.
Seriously, yeah.
He shatters all the conventions. I have this piece that I jokingly say what Taylor Swift taught Dante about poetry, in which I imagine what kind of, transgressive moves would Taylor Swift have to do to break out of the kind of limiting genres in which she sees? If she wanted to write an epic, if she wanted to become a poet who would be remembered 700 years from now and not forgotten 70 years from now, what would she have to do?
Interesting.
And I jokingly sort of set that up to say that's exactly what Dante did. But Dante, so Dante's already, even these strange love lyrics, okay, I'm not going to defend these weird things. My students hate them.
Sure.
But already in these things, he's already doing something which is kind of quasi-spiritual, quasi-theological.
Okay.
Because he starts to say
Because these are normally just devoid of spiritual content. It's just like passionate.
Yeah, you could say they're psychologically deep, right? They're concerned with aesthetic experiences of beauty, these types of things, right? But Dante starts to say that the beauty of Beatrice is so illuminating that it will either cause people to convert who have an inner core of goodness, or it will blind those who have already committed themselves to a life of evil. Almost like the sealing of the Gesù in Rome, right?
Who is Beatrice?
Beatrice was maybe a real girl.
Okay.
Beatrice Portinari, that Dante says, or she's a made-up girl that Dante needed for the purposes of his spiritual mission. But
Got it.
there's a little bit of a debate. But currently, right now, scholars think that she's a real girl, and then Dante sort of airbrushed some of the details. But he says in his own autobiography that he met her when he was 9, in the 9th month of the year, on the 9th day of the month, in the 9th hour, and he met
How poetic.
Beatrice. And from then on, his life was marked in servitude to love.
Wow.
Because he had an experience which for the rest of his life, he searched around in his heart trying to find words to express.
Yeah.
Which incidentally is something that he says in Purgatorio 24. So that initial experience when he was a boy and tried to work through in his 20s trying to write, he says ultimately made him a good poet of the divine, because he had gotten used to the quest for inwardness and interiority and seeking out language to describe love, even though he recognized that there was going to be a gap between what I can say and what I could see in my heart.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, it reminds me of what we were just talking about at the beginning of this conversation. This, young people have this latent desire for more. And in him, that was awakened by this person of Beatrice.
Yeah, it was awakened by beauty.
Just like this encounter with beauty that made him realize, wow, there's so much more.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it was an encounter which for him was not merely passive. He sort of saw Beatrice as this beauty, and he wanted his poetry to be almost like a monstrance, in which the beauty of Beatrice would be set.
So interesting.
Or you could, if you want to go more medieval, maybe you could say Dante's poetry was the begemmed, bejeweled reliquary box in which the beauty of Beatrice was hidden.
Wow.
And he thought you could go up to his sort of box of his poem, open it up, and see the beauty of Beatrice and be changed.
Is she featured in the comedy?
Yeah.
Obviously I haven't read the comedy, which this is a major deficiency in my own liberal arts
Well,
education.
maybe you'll want to do it now. Yeah.
I definitely do want to do it for sure. My wife has been reading it this year, reading through the Eslin translation, because she's been going through the Ascent podcast with which you've been on.
Right.
She heard you on there with Deacon Harrison.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to read it. It's certainly on my list. I want to get your translation, especially after reading your description of your comparison to some of the other translations.
Right.
So I will read it, but what role does Beatrice play in the comedy? Is she the main character?
She's like the prime mover of
Okay.
Dante's salvation.
Okay.
Dante's the main character.
Because it's autobiographical.
It is.
Yeah.
The poet and the pilgrim, the man who undergoes the epic journey and the man who writes about it are the same. It would be as if Virgil and Aeneas were the same person. And this gives Dante all kinds of incredible opportunities. Cinematic, right? Is that he can sometimes talk as the poet, and he can step back and give these wide angle views in which the pilgrim walks across the landscape. And sometimes he can give the camera to the character himself and film from the point of view shot, right? What filmmakers call the POV shot, right? And so he can go back and forth this way and create this incredible layered complexity. But Beatrice, I think that Dante thinks that, again, sometimes it's, can sound a little strange to us, but I think that Dante thinks that one of the duties and joys of being a human being is that we communicate the beauty of God to each other. And then this kind of hierarchy of icons in which if you're not going to want to follow Christ if you think that my following of Christ is unattractive.
Right.
If I'm not iconically attractive, at least if you can't see anything in me, nothing's going to happen, right? In terms of, that kind of those people that I meet and that I run into. And so I think that Dante thinks that Beatrice is like his own secondary cause of an unmoved mover.
That's so interesting.
That Beatrice is so beautiful that Dante wants to write about her.
Yeah.
And when he wants to write about her, he wants to do it well. But in order to do it well, he's got to study. And when he starts to study, he says in one of his autobiographies, I went looking for silver and found gold.
Wow.
I was just trying to write about Beatrice. But then I started reading stuff like Cicero and The Consolation of Philosophy.
Yeah.
And I discovered the secret source of Beatrice's beauty was eternity itself.
Was Beatrice, do we think, if she's a real person, was she a committed Catholic? Did he have any indication, or does he give any indication in his writings about that? Or is this just sort of, she is beauty personified and that leads to the truth itself?
Yeah, I don't think, Dante doesn't really describe her in ways that I think really make a lot of cultural sense for us. We'd love to hear this is Therese of Lisieux or something like that.
Exactly.
And so, he is obviously sort of, bound by his own sort of cultural categories. Sure. But I think, he does move in the direction of sort of allegorizing Beatrice. Now, fascinating, he says that Beatrice is philosophy, philosophy herself. And the reason he was attracted to Beatrice is because, so he has this period of his life in which he says, hey, all those poems I wrote about Beatrice, I was actually writing about philosophy. And he tries to kind of, massage his own kind of image in retrospect.
Yeah.
But fascinatingly, at the end of Purgatory, Beatrice comes and meets Dante. At the top of Purgatory, Dante's climbed the mountain and he's been purged, he's been purified of, he's returned to what Aquinas called the original state of justice. He's also been reintegrated into the natural world. And Beatrice comes down. And one of the things that she accuses him of is being unfaithful to him. Which again, my students are like, what?
Wait, unfaithful to her?
Yeah, even though she's been dead.
Right.
It's like, oh no,
right.
The creepy ex-girlfriend stalking Dante from the grave, right? But she's
were they in the poem? Were they married before he died?
Nope, never married. He married someone else.
Okay, all right. This is okay.
This is the love lyric, Ben.
All right.
Anyway, but she comes and says, "You weren't faithful to me in my particularity," and so it's really interesting.
What does that mean? In my particularity?
How dare you allegorize me? How dare you say you loved me because I was philosophy? I am Beatrice. Io sono Beatrice. Sono Beatrice. I'm Beatrice. And what, again, was I think so interesting about that is that I think Dante had sort of moved in this direction of, philosophical allegory, right? He was getting too brainy. And he writes into his own poem this rebuke of getting too brainy, that he hadn't loved those particular people, those particular moments, that particular beauty manifesting itself in the midst of his ordinary life. And thus the poet rebukes himself in the middle of his poem.
For being too ethereal.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Huh. All right, so let's say you're like me and have not read Dante before. What would you say? I'm going to read Dante. I want to read Dante.
You're in.
Sally's had an amazing review of her time through it and has convinced me. And then I have you, singing to me the glories of Dante. So I'm going to read it soon. I'll get your versions. But, just someone who's listening on here and just, my bookshelf is already very full. I have so many things to read. Why should we read Dante?
Because Dante tries to perform in the heart and in the body and in the nerves what we think we know in our brains. And that's the secret of his poetry. His poetry is experimental. His poetry converts head knowledge to heart knowledge. And he does it by means of this story. And in my version, we've been talking mainly about Purgatorio, but in my version of Inferno, I think your listeners will probably like this. There are moments where I quite literally listen to Russian circles before, like heavy prog rock kind of stuff before translating, and then I had to turn it off. But there are moments, I think, in which I kind of jokingly call Dante's Inferno the heavy metal, the hard rock of poetry, in which Dante uses some harsh and grating words. He has some obscenities even, but mainly just these words which are sort of unmissably harsh.
Yeah.
In order, I think, as I call it in the introduction, as a great act of discreation. Discreation. Dante has to run the 7 days of creation in reverse to get us back to that first day when God was dwelling over the face of the deep. Get us back to pure quantum energy and the sort of spiritual life. I think he thinks that this is the fear of the Lord, right? He has to give us our world, his world, but actually is really similar to ours in fascinating ways. He has to give us his world in a way that briefly makes us nauseated at the vanity and the selfishness and the malevolence and the avariciousness. And we see it and we think, oh God, that's me too. And when we say, oh God, that's me too, I think Dante thinks that he has temporarily sort of, disoriented us, discreated this, kind of like shell of desires around us. And we've sort of been reverted back to this kind of first day of creation in which we say, God, what are you going to do with someone like me? That's the point of the Inferno. The point of Purgatorio is having gone back to that first day of creation, then through trust and exercises and ennobling poetry and ennobling biblical passages and spiritual exercises, then we can take that sort of initial fire and build it back up into a spiritual world, into a spiritual creation. And so I think that's, and in some ways it'd be kind of, like saying, well, why do I need an orchestra to play Bach for me? I've got the score. Right?
Sure, yeah.
Anytime I want to know what Bach's Brandenburg concertos are, I can just open up and look at it, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, you want to play that stuff. Poetry is when you set the score to music. And in this case, the score, I guess you could more or less say is moral philosophy, but also the spiritual life. Because it's one thing to walk through life and think that you have, the 17 correct opinions which make you a Christian. Right. That's a good thing to do, okay? The brain's important. There's another thing for that stuff to start to get into the meat of your body so that you hunger for it, so that you hunger for Christ more than you hunger for other things, even if those things are good. And I think that's sort of Dante's great goal. And he really thought, and he's been partially successful, he really thought that his poem could transform the world. He says in Paradiso, my poem is going to be like a spark, which I've gone to heaven, the ocean of fire, and I've been able, he thinks of himself almost kind of like Prometheus, carrying down from the gods a single spark, which he's banked.
Wow.
And I'm going to drop one spark in the world, and that's my poem, and it's going to set the world on fire. Poca favilla gran fiamma seconda. Huge fires follow tiny sparks.
That's from the poem?
That's from the poem. That's from Paradiso.
Wow. How was it received at the time? I mean, was there any success? Did he see commercial success of the poem there, or has this been recognized as a great work of literature only since he died?
Yeah, he was immediately, I guess it was kind of interesting. Back in those days, there's no real commercial success. Obviously, there's no printing press.
Right.
But there is, you could say, aristocratic honor. And
did he have that?
He did.
Okay.
He was never invited home to Florence, from which he was exiled. And he never.
Why was he exiled from Florence?
Oof, that's Guelphs and Ghibelline stuff right there.
Okay.
That's basically he got caught in the middle of these huge tectonic shifting plates of warring parties that had, and this is really has nothing to do with our day, right? But these warring parties which had hated each other for centuries, and thus anytime one party would get in charge, it would try to change voting districts and harm the other party as much as possible.
Wow.
So that it could never come back into power.
So was he just banned because he was in the other party? He was an aristocrat. You can tell I have young kids.
That too, yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, he was in a party which fell out of favor, and precisely because he was one of the up and coming stars.
Got it.
Was exiled from Florence for life.
Can never go back. So where did he write from?
He wrote all over. He wandered around. At first he seeming he was a hot-blooded man. Seeming he joined a series of militias in northern Tuscany.
Wow.
And he was going to join with them and other exiled folks, and maybe even pair up with some of people who had been previously enemies, and some of the Ghibellines, and he was going to form a militia.
Wow.
With these other aristocrats, and they were going to fight their way back.
Fascinating.
He maybe did this for a couple of years, and then he became disillusioned with his new allies. He saw that they were craven and avaricious and vain, and he said, I became a party unto myself. So seemingly, having been exiled from his home, he began to develop a kind of nostalgia for his original patria, for his original home, and he began to develop this kind of X-ray vision. What is wrong with our world? It stopped asking himself the question, what's wrong with my Florence?
Yeah.
But he started asking, what's wrong with our world? And in the middle of this, I think the comedy was born. The former love lyric, right, poet became an epic poet. He had started like a singer-songwriter, and he ended up something more like Virgil.
Yeah.
And then he spent the rest of his life wandering around. So Dante is almost like the sort of George Washington of Italy, right? You could sit on a park bench in almost any town in northern Italy, and they'll say that Dante was sitting there. There'll be a placard there.
That's
Dante
so
sat on this park
interesting.
bench for 17 minutes on July 4th,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
But he was in Verona. He was in Padua.
Okay.
He was in Ravenna. We know that he made a trip to Venice where he gave some lectures.
Have you done the Dante tour pilgrimage and kind of gone everywhere that he was?
My college does do that for students. Okay. I have never been to Ravenna, but I'll be there in the spring because I'm teaching.
Oh, nice.
I'm teaching students in Italy in the spring, and so I get to go for the first time because the last time my wife and I were there, we were graduate students. We'd run out of money, and we had like $5.
Very common graduate student problem.
Like, well, we could either buy like a meal of Chinese food, or we could buy a one-way bus ticket to Ravenna. Like, we'll go with eating.
Yeah, pretty easy choice.
Anyway, so we get our reward now.
Yeah, amazing. All right, well, we're almost out of time. I'm sorry. I've bombarded you with questions here, and we've ran out of the ones that I wanted to cover. I did want to ask you about this. I've heard contrapasso mentioned with respect to the comedy. Mm-hmm. What does contrapasso mean? And is this something that new readers should be on the lookout for, or will help to conceptually understand and make sense of the comedy?
Yeah, I think it helps. I mean, I think it's just, you could see something like this in Purgatorio, even though it's not a punishment, but rather sort of spiritual exercise. But basically it just means a counterbalancing either punishment for the wicked or spiritual exercise for the just, in which for the just, for the good, for the righteous, those who accepted Christ, it bends the bow in the opposite direction.
Okay.
I was too avaricious in life, and so now I have my wrists and ankles bolted to the ground and my forehead on the ground, and I sing chants about how my soul clung to the dust until I get the point. I loved something small with too much. And anyway, so this is the kind of contrapasso. In hell, of course, it's a punishment. But it almost feels like it's, as I put it in one of my books, it almost feels like that even in hell, these souls have a type of freedom that remains to them. And the goods that they choose were those that they had habituated themselves to choosing in their lives, and thus choose this thing which looks strange and monstrous to everyone but themselves.
Interesting, yeah.
And so the schismatic, the divisive, walking around hell. Dante looks at them and they have like clumps of their body lopped off. It's absolutely terrible. But when they see Dante looking at him, one of them says, "See how I rend myself." And he pulls open his own rib cage.
Wow.
It's like, you think that is bad? Look at this. Which is horrific. But then when you begin to think about it, right? This is these divisive people are those who sort of, practiced at dividing for so long that they forgot that it's an unnatural and unrighteous thing. And thus they sort of lean into it with a type of perverse pride. Of course, we know this in ourselves. We know this in other people, right? Like, oh, you think that's disgusting, do you? Right? How about that, right? And we sort of double down in this kind of like monstrous display of pride. But anyway, the contrapasso is sort of, embedded in that type of world. It's a counterbalancing punishment, which in some ways ought to help the poor. It's almost like theoretically, right? If the souls sort of looked at their surroundings and go, this is ridiculous, this is absurd, then, theoretically, not practically, but theoretically, they go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And such was my life. My life was absurd and small and broken. It's almost like the contrapasso could deliver a message, but these souls are tragically blind.
Yeah.
Because they hold on to their little loves and their little hearts so tightly, they won't let go. But in Purgatorio, these things actually become medicinal. They become healing.
Rehabilitative, yeah.
Rehabilitative, therapeutic. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, fascinating. All right, Jason, really appreciate you coming on. Where can people follow more of your work, including buying your book? I mean, it sounds like maybe for those who need to start like me, starting with A Beginner's Guide to Dante would be a good place to start. Should you read that alongside your read through of the comedy, or read that first and then read the comedy? What would you recommend?
Yeah, the Beginner's Guide is great. If you are the sort of person who who doesn't have a background in literature and thinks, okay, I'm getting interested. I've written a book, 40-page book called Why Literature Still Matters. And I'm blessed. Everyone I know who's read it, by the time they're done with it, said, okay, now what?
Nice. Yeah.
That could be a great sort of preparation. But I mean, believe it or not, I encourage my kids to skip introductions when they're reading classical books. Like, oh, that stuff is boring. But believe it or not, I try to make these introductions as gripping as possible. And so I challenge your readers, your listeners, right? I challenge your listeners, right, to read the first 3 sentences of my introduction and Inferno and not finish it. But I think it's just such I tried to write it for smart people who are morally serious. I didn't want to write down to anyone. But on the other hand, I didn't want to write in this sort of technical way for just for scholars. And so I try to slip in as many important concepts and terms to open up the poem as possible, including sort of Dante's Boethian background, what he thought about classics, why he even thought he was writing poetry. Anyway, so the introductions in both of the translations, both Inferno and Purgatorio, those who have read them have told me that they're really moving and it's sort of, help them with the poem.
Yeah.
So
great. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Best place to buy?
The best place to buy would either be, they're on Amazon.
We're in favor of, supporting authors, I don't know.
It makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazon takes 50% of a book.
Yeah. So where do you want people to buy? If people are going from here, I'll include a link in the show notes too. Okay. Where should we buy?
You can go one of 2 places.
Okay.
You can go to my publisher's website, Angelico Press, and you can get them online there. I think they'll even give you a little discount if you buy both of them. And I also have a website, jasonmbaxter.com, and I have a little bookstore, and I sell signed copies off of that. And the thing that people find most amusing is that I wrap them in my old lecture notes. And in fact, I think it's gotten worse. I've started ripping out pages from my yellow legal pads, my sort of like mad ravings, planning a next essay, and I've started to wrap the books with those. And people have written me like, Dr. Baxter, can I get some yellow legal pad notes in particular? I don't just want lectures. I want, right? So people are
amazing.
But I guess evidently Jeff Bezos doesn't do that if you buy it off Amazon.
Don't go to Amazon. All right. So jasonmbaxter.com for the legal pad wrapped ramblings.
I can't promise all legal pads, but
fair.
I can give you something with mad ravings on it.
Okay, perfect. And then angelicopress.com.
angelicopress.com.
Straight from the source. All right. Very quickly, give me a 30-second teaser of your Cuthbert film project. I know you've been traveling in northern England, Berwick-upon-Tweed, Holy Island, all of that. If listeners haven't heard of Holy Island, it's a really cool place. You can get there when the tide is down. You can wade across the channel, and when the tide is up, you're stuck unless you have a boat. I don't know, you spent some time there and you're working on a film project, so give me a 30-second teaser of that.
Yeah, I wrote about it on my Substack, Beauty Matters, called Meeting Gandalf on Holy Island. And I say in that I went on a vacation and had a deep spiritual experience while I was there, and it was amazing. But I'm going with my Benedictine College students from the Center for Beauty and Culture. We're going to walk 65 miles from Melrose, Scotland, which is an absolutely charming village. We're going to walk east and a little south. We're going to cross the border. You go up into the Scottish hills, and there's a fence that separates a Scottish sheep pasture from an English sheep pasture. And you climb over the little wooden stile, and there's a wooden sign above it which says Scotland, England. And that's your international border crossing. That's how it should be.
Amazing.
And then you cross into England, and then you go back down into the valley, and you approach Holy Island, which is the island of saints. You could say it's the beating heart of Celtic Christianity in the middle of Britain. It's a piece of Ireland in the middle of England. It was founded by monks from Iona, and those monks from Iona had come from Bangor, which had been founded by the apostle of Patrick. So they can trace their lineage back.
That's amazing.
It's a holy place. It's a beautiful place. We're going to walk the whole thing, make a film about it, and 2 weeks.
Great, amazing. Well, I hope that's a lot of fun. And I'll look forward to watching the film. Thanks so much for joining today, Jason.
Thanks, man.
To my listeners, if you have a question for Jason, feel free to send me a note and I can forward it along. And until next time, God bless you.